The camera zooms in on a shredded wedding invitation fluttering in a crystal vase. My invitation, the one I mailed with trembling hands. Marrying a firefighter. What a shame, my mother sneered, her voice dripping like ice water down my spine. My father didn't even look up from his Rolex. They boycotted the ceremony. I walked the aisle alone, veil heavy, heart heavier, while my sister smirked in the front pew, because mother had already whispered to my fiancé, "Choose her instead. She's the real prize." He didn't. He chose me. Jake, grease under his nails, soot in his soul, slipped a simple band on my finger and promised forever. 6 months later, the nation watched him drag a stranger from a burning warehouse. Medals gleamed on his chest. Headlines screamed hero. Our faces flooded every screen. My phone exploded, 110 missed calls. Voicemails from the same voices that called us trash, now begging, sobbing, "Anna, forgive us." But the real shock. The man Jake saved was my father. The mother who tried to steal my groom once carried 5-year-old Jake from flames herself. And the blackmailer demanding hush money, my own blood. Stay until the end. You'll see elites kneel, mansions sold, and a daughter rise unbreakable. Every twist is true. Every apology is too late. And the revenge, deliciously public. Click play, your jaw will drop by minute 3. My name is Anna Harrington Whitmore, 28 years old, senior marketing director at a downtown Chicago firm that plans galas for Fortune 500 companies. I grew up in a North Shore mansion where the silver was polished weekly, and the word no was never spoken to me until I brought home Jake Brennan, 38, third-generation firefighter, calloused hands and all. The collision of our worlds started the day I mailed the invitations. I stood in the marble-floored post office on Michigan Avenue, cradling 200 cream envelopes embossed with gold foil. Each one carried a photograph of Jake and me on the pier at Navy Pier, wind-whipping my veil, his dress blues crisp against the lake. The clerk weighed the stacks, smiled, and slid them into the canvas mailbag. I remember thinking, this is it, the moment my parents finally see how happy he makes me. I kissed the top envelope for luck, the one addressed to mother and father, in my neatest calligraphy, and watched it disappear. 3 days later, a single envelope returned, postmarked from their estate in Lake Forest. No wedding response card, no polite checkmark beside "joyfully accepts." Just a heavy cream sheet folded once mother's fountain pen script, sharp enough to cut glass. "Anna, your father and I are appalled. A firefighter. The Brennan boy hauls hoses for a living while you are raised for boardrooms and benefits. We raised you to secure the family name, not dilute it. Do not expect us at this spectacle. Regretfully, Claire and Richard Whitmore." I read it in the elevator on the way to my corner office, the words blurring as the doors dinged open. Colleagues streamed past with coffee and congratulations. I forced a smile and tucked the letter into my purse like a live grenade. That evening, Jake came off a 24-hour shift, soot still clinging to the cuffs of his jeans. He dropped his duffel by the door of our modest Lincoln Park 2 flat, the one we bought with his hazard pay, and my signing bonus. I handed him a beer, then the letter. He read it slowly, thumb tracing the embossed crest at the top, my family's crest, a lion rampant that suddenly looked ridiculous. "They'll come around," he said, voice low and steady, the same tone he uses on scared kids in burning buildings. People change when they see love up close. I wanted to believe him. Jake's world is simple. Show up, do the work. Go home to the person you love. Mine had always been layered tennis lessons at the club, debutante balls, the unspoken rule that marrying well meant marrying money older than your own. My father built shopping malls. My mother chaired every charity auction from here to Palm Beach. Firefighters to them were the men who parked the trucks outside their galas, not the ones invited inside. I flashed back to the first time I brought Jake to Sunday brunch at the estate. Mother's eyes flicked over his polished boots, the faint scar on his knuckle from a collapsed roof beam. Father asked about his pension plan as if Jake were applying for a loan. My sister Elise, 25 and already engaged to a hedge fund heir, giggled behind her mimosa. "Does he come with the truck, Anna? Like a package deal?" Jake just smiled, squeezed my knee under the table, and later in the car said, Your dad's scared of anything he can't buy. I laughed then. I wasn't laughing now. The letter burned a hole in my thoughts for a week. I drafted replies, polite, pleading, furious, then deleted them all. Finally, I drove north on a gray Saturday unannounced, the way children do when they still believe parents can be surprised into love. The gates swung open at my fingerprint. The long drive curved past manicured boxwoods and the fountain where Elise and I once floated paper boats. Mrs. Delgado, the housekeeper who'd bandaged my skinned knees, met me at the door with wide eyes. Miss Anna, there in the study. I waved her off and climbed the sweeping staircase, heels silent on the runner. The study door stood ajar. Father's voice carried clipped and impatient discussing quarterly returns. I was about to knock when I heard my name. Anna's always been headstrong, Claire, but this is self-sabotage. The Brennan boy. He'll never keep her in the style she's accustomed to. Mother's reply was softer, laced with disappointment, sharp as winter air. I told her the invitations were a mistake. She'll thank us later when the novelty wears off. I pushed the door wider. They looked up Father behind the mahogany desk, Mother arranging white roses in a crystal vase. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I saw it on the hearth beside the fireplace. Tools, a scrap of cream cardstock curling in the heat. My invitation. The photograph of Jake and me had been torn clean in half. Jake's smiling face lay in the ashes, my veil reduced to confetti. Mother's hand flew to her pearls. Anna, darling, we weren't expecting. I stepped forward, picked up the largest piece, our names in gold foil now singed at the edges. You weren't expecting me to see this. Father cleared his throat. We decided it was best not to encourage. Encourage what love? My voice cracked like ice on the lake in March. I looked at the mantel above the fireplace where family portraits marched in chronological order. My christening, Elise's sweet 16. My college graduation. And there, propped against a silver frame, was another envelope, cream gold foil identical to the one I'd mailed. Sealed, addressed in my handwriting to Mother and Father. But the corner was ripped open, the wax seal broken, as if someone had steamed it apart and resealed it badly. I had never sent a second invitation. My pulse hammered in my ears. Who opened this? Mother's gaze darted to the torn pieces in my hand, then away. Father stood palms flat on the desk. Anna, you're upset. Let's discuss this calmly. I backed toward the door, the shredded invitation clutched to my chest like a wound. There's nothing left to discuss. I fled down the staircase, past Mrs. Delgado's worried face, out into the drizzle that had started to fall. The gates closed behind me with a final clang. In the rearview mirror, the mansion shrank windows glowing like eyes that had already looked away. That night, Jake held me while I cried into his t-shirt that smelled of smoke and soap. They don't get to define us, he murmured into my hair. I nodded, but the image of that second envelope, sealed, addressed, never sent, gnawed at me. Someone had gone to great lengths to intercept it. Someone who wanted my parents to see exactly what they were rejecting. Little did I know the fire that would light the truth had already been kindled years ago in a garage thick with carbon monoxide and secrets my father could not remember. The morning of the wedding broke clear and cold, the kind of October light that makes Lake Michigan look like polished steel. I stood in the bride's room of the old stone chapel on the university campus. Lace sleeves trembling against my arms while my maid of honor, Sarah, fastened the last pearl button at my wrist. Through the leaded window, I could see the courtyard filling with guests in camel coats and navy suits, their breath puffing in small clouds. I had reserved the first 3 pews on my side for family. Mother, Father, Elise, Uncle Robert, Aunt Lillian, the cousins from Boston. 22 seats in total, each with a cream ribbon tied around a single white rose. Sarah squeezed my hand and whispered, "It's time," and I followed her down the narrow hallway that smelled of candle wax and old hymnals, my train whispering over the flagstones like a secret I wasn't ready to tell. The organ began the processional the moment the doors opened. I stepped into the aisle expecting the rustle of silk, the flash of familiar smiles. The soft gasp my mother always gave when something beautiful unfolded. Instead, I met a wall of silence so complete I could hear the creak of my father's empty pew as the wood settled. The ribbons fluttered like surrender flags. The roses looked suddenly funereal. My eyes swept the left side of the chapel and found only strangers, colleagues from the firm Jake's Firehouse crew in their dress uniforms, a handful of college friends who had driven in from Milwaukee. Uncle Robert sat alone in the second row, shoulders hunched, staring at his program as though it might bite him. Aunt Lillian was missing entirely. Elise occupied the very back corner, arms folded, lips pressed into a line sharp enough to cut paper. No one from the North Shore had come except the ones who couldn't avoid the invitation without social suicide. Whispers started before I reached the halfway mark, low and venomous, the way wind hisses through dry leaves. Couldn't even fill her own side, someone murmured behind a gloved hand. Whitmores always did think they were too good for the rest of us. Another voice answered. I recognized the cadence Mrs. Langford from the club, the one who chaired the holiday ball and still called waitstaff the help. A cousin I hadn't seen since childhood leaned toward her husband and said loud enough for the microphone to catch Firefighter. Can you imagine? Claire must be spinning in her grave, except she's not dead, she's just mortified. Laughter rippled thin and brittle. My cheeks burned hotter than the votive candles lining the windows. Sarah's grip tightened on my arm, but there was no shielding me from the truth I was walking alone, and everyone in the room knew exactly why. Jake waited at the altar beneath the arched beams, sunlight striping his dress blues like medals he hadn't yet earned. His eyes never left mine, steady as the lake on a windless day. When I reached him, the whispers faded into the organ's final chord, and for a moment, it was only us. The minister, Reverend Paulson, who had married my grandparents 50 years earlier, opened his leather-bound book and began. I barely heard the scripture about love being patient. I was too busy counting the empty seats behind me, each one a small coffin for the family I thought I had. When it was time for the vows, Jake took both my hands. His palms were warm, calloused, smelling faintly of the cedar soap he used after shifts. He spoke without notes, voice low enough that the microphone strained to catch every word. Anna, I promise to show up every day, whether the call is a cat in a tree or a 5-alarm blaze. I promise to carry you when your legs give out, to listen when the world gets too loud, and to love you even when the smoke makes it hard to see the way forward. You are my home, my safe harbor, my everything. His thumb brushed the corner of my eye, catching a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. He didn't wipe it away with drama or ceremony. He simply pressed it into my skin like a seal, a silent vow that said, I've got you. The congregation sighed a collective exhale that sounded almost like forgiveness, but I knew better. They were sighing for the romance, not for me. I managed my own vows without crumbling, though my voice shook on the word forever. Rings slid onto fingers, cool metal warmed instantly by skin. Reverend Paulson pronounced us married, and Jake lifted my veil with the same gentleness he used to remove oxygen masks from frightened children. The kiss was soft, brief, perfect, until the vibrations started against my thigh. I had silenced my phone for the ceremony, but the buzz was insistent, a trapped bee against silk. Jake felt it too. His brow creased for a fraction of a second before he smiled and kissed me again, deeper this time, as if to drown out whatever waited in my pocket. Applause swelled, rice showered, and we turned to face the congregation. The empty pews gaped like missing teeth in an otherwise perfect smile. In the receiving line outside, beneath the turning maples, the whispers continued. Such a lovely service, dear, even if... Mrs. Langford let the sentence dangle, eyes flicking to the vacant seats. Uncle Robert hugged me stiffly, muttering, Your father's blood pressure, you understand, before hurrying to his town car. Elise air-kissed both cheeks and said, Call when the honeymoon glow wears off. Reality bites, sis. Jake's captain clapped him on the back and promised the firehouse would throw a proper party later, engines polished and sirens optional. My marketing team presented a engraved silver frame. Sarah slipped me a flask of champagne for the limo. No one mentioned the absence of the Whitmores, but it hung in the air like smoke after the fire is out. We were halfway through photographs on the chapel steps when I finally checked my phone. The screen showed one new text time-stamped exactly when Reverend Paulson asked if anyone objected. The number was my mother's, though the words felt foreign, typed by someone who had never learned gentleness. "We won't watch you ruin your life. Do not contact us again." I stared at the message until the letters blurred. Jake saw the change in my face and stepped close, shielding me from the photographer's lens. "Whatever it is, we handle it together," he said. I nodded, but the weight of those 10 words settled on my shoulders like wet wool. The photographer called for one last shot: groom, dipping bride beneath the autumn sky, and I forced a smile that felt borrowed. As Jake's lips met mine again, the phone buzzed a second time, then a third, each vibration a small earthquake against my hip. I pulled back just enough to glance at the screen. 6 missed calls, all from the same unknown Chicago number. No voicemail. The final buzz came as rice rained down around us, and the screen lit up with a single new text from the mystery caller: "We need to talk. Now." The rice was still stuck in my hair when Jake and I stepped into the back of the limo, the door thudding shut like a judge's gavel. I stared at the screen glowing between us, 6 missed calls and that single line: "We need to talk. Now." My thumb hovered, but Jake closed his hand over mine. "Not today," he said, voice low, steady as the engine rumbling beneath us. "Today is ours." I let him slide the phone into his pocket, but the words clung to me like damp wool. We drove south through the city, past the glittering storefronts and the first brave Christmas displays, toward the little reception hall Jake's crew had rented above the firehouse on Halstead. The unknown caller could wait. My parents had already drawn their line in the sand. Whatever came next would have to crawl over it. The weeks that followed were a slow hemorrhage of everything I thought I knew about belonging. Sarah, my maid of honor, texted the morning after the wedding with a string of heart emojis and a promise to help unpack gifts. Then nothing. Days turned into a week, then 2. I left voicemails about brunch, about returning the borrowed veil, about anything that might keep the thread from snapping. Silence. At the office, the marketing floor that once buzzed with congratulations now hummed with a different frequency. I caught the junior copywriter, Megan, leaning over the cubicle wall, stage whispering, "Can you imagine trading the Whitmore name for turnout gear? I heard he still lives in the same walk-up he grew up in." Another voice chimed in. "Firefighter husband sounds like a Lifetime movie, not a life plan." I walked past with my coffee held high, pretending I hadn't heard, but the words lodged under my skin like splinters. Lunch invitations dried up. The women who used to beg me to join their charity planning committees suddenly had conflicts every Thursday. My phone, once a river of notifications, slowed to a trickle of work emails and spam. Even the building concierge, who had known me since I moved in after college, averted his eyes when I collected the mail. I told myself it was the honeymoon glow fading, that people were busy with their own lives, but the truth was colder. I had become a cautionary tale. The girl who reached too low and paid the price. Jake noticed, of course. He noticed everything. One night I came home to find him at the kitchen table sanding a scorch mark off an old wooden cutting board he'd rescued from a house fire. "People talk until they need something," he said without looking up. "Then they remember your number." I wanted to believe him, but the silence was deafening. The letter from my parents arrived on a Tuesday, forwarded from the Lake Forest address to our new mailbox in Lincoln Park. It was thicker than the first, sealed with the same crimson wax, but this time the envelope was addressed only to me. I carried it upstairs past the stacks of unopened wedding gifts we still hadn't found room for, and sat on the edge of the bathtub. The paper inside was heavy, almost damp with the weight of their disappointment. Mother's handwriting filled 2 pages, a litany of everything I had thrown away, every opportunity I had squandered, every way I had failed to understand the privilege of my birth. Father had added a postscript in his blunt engineer's scrawl. "Consider this your final allowance. We are done funding your rebellion." I read it twice, then a third time, until the words lost meaning and became only shapes on the page. Something inside me snapped clean and sharp, like ice breaking on the lake in March. I carried the letter to the fireplace in our living room, the one we had never used because the chimney needed repointing. Jake was on shift, the apartment quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I struck a match, watched the flame bloom, and touched it to the corner of the envelope. The wax melted first, pooling like blood before the paper caught. I fed it sheet by sheet, watching the elegant script curl and blacken, the Whitmore crest reduced to ash. When the last fragment glowed orange and collapsed, I spoke into the empty room, my voice steady for the first time since the chapel. You will regret this. It wasn't a scream, wasn't even loud. It was a vow carved into the air and sealed by the smoke curling toward the ceiling. I opened the flue, let the draft carry the remnants up and out, and felt the weight lift from my shoulders like a coat I no longer needed. Jake came home at dawn, smelling of diesel and coffee. I met him at the door with the fireplace poker still in my hand. He took one look at the ashes, the faint scorch on the hearth, and understood. He didn't ask questions. He simply pulled me against his chest. Turnout coat rough against my cheek, and held me until the sun climbed high enough to paint the walls gold. That was Jake, no speeches, no drama, just presence. While I burned bridges, he rebuilt foundations. The department had started leaving messages about commendations, local news wanting interviews after a warehouse rescue that made the evening broadcast. Reporters camped outside the firehouse microphones ready for the hero firefighter and his society bride. Jake turned them all away. I've got a shift at 6, he told the captain, same as always. He polished boots, checked hoses, ran drills with the probies. Fame was a distraction. The job was the job. I watched him leave for work each morning, duffel slung over his shoulder, and felt a fierce pride settle in my bones. Let them gossip. Let them ghost. We had each other, and that was enough. The shift in my own resolve came gradually, like ice thawing into a stream. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I deleted the group chats that had gone dormant. At the office, I walked into meetings with my chin high. Presentations, crisp numbers, unassailable. When Megan smirked about my blue-collar downgrade, I smiled and handed her the quarterly report she'd been avoiding for weeks. Page 12 has your section, I said sweetly. Deadline's Friday. The gossip didn't stop, but it lost its sting. I was no longer the girl begging for approval. I was the woman who had chosen and chosen well. One Thursday evening in early November, Jake came home early, cheeks flushed from the wind off the lake. He dropped his keys in the bowl by the door and pulled me into the kitchen where the answering machine blinked red. We still had an old habit from his parents' house, the kind that recorded messages in a tinny voice. He pressed play before I could protest. A woman's voice filled the room, polished and urgent. Mr. Brennan, this is Caroline Voss with NBC's American Valor. We're producing a national segment on everyday heroes, and your warehouse rescue last month has been viewed over 3 million times. Your story saves lives literally and figuratively. We'd like to feature you and your wife. Call me at Jake hit stop, shook his head and reached to erase it. I caught his wrist. Listen to the whole thing I said. He sighed but let it play. Caroline Voss went on about primetime slots, about the power of visibility, about how one firefighter's courage could inspire a generation. When it ended, the apartment was silent, except for the tick of the wall clock. Jake looked at me, waiting. I thought of the ashes in the fireplace, of the empty pews, of the vow I had made. Call her back, I said. He started to argue, but I was already dialing. The number rang twice before Caroline Voss picked up, her voice bright and caffeinated, the kind that could sell ice to penguins. Anna, perfect timing. I was about to leave another message. I put her on speaker so Jake could hear, and she launched straight in without pleasantries. Your husband's warehouse rescue last month, helmet cam footage hit 3 million views in 48 hours. The clip ends with him carrying out Mr. Harrington oxygen mask pressed to the old man's face, flames licking the ceiling behind them. Raw, real, unforgettable. We want to build a 10-minute segment around it for American Valor, prime time, coast to coast. Jake's the lead. You're the heart. We film in 2 weeks at the firehouse, then a sit-down in our Michigan Avenue studio. Think about the message, everyday courage, love that defies odds. This could change lives. She paused for breath, and I felt the hook sink deep. Jake stood by the kitchen window, arms crossed, watching a delivery truck idle below. "Ma'am, I appreciate the interest, but I've got a full schedule. Ladder drills, hydrant inspections, the usual." Caroline laughed not unkindly. "That's exactly why America needs to see you. Not the polished hero, the working one. 10 minutes of your time, Mr. Brennan. The city's already talking." She promised to email contracts, call sheets, wardrobe notes. When I hung up, the apartment felt smaller, the walls pressing in with possibility. Jake rubbed the back of his neck the way he did when a call turned complicated. "I don't need a spotlight," he said. "I need 8 hours of sleep and a functioning SCBA regulator." I understood. Fame was noise. The job was oxygen. But I also saw the numbers climbing on my phone shares like strangers tagging #ChicagoHero. The city was listening. I started small, nudging him over breakfast, over dishes, over the quiet evenings when the radiator clanked like an old friend. "It's not about you," I told him one night, curled against his side on the couch. "It's about the probie who's scared to go inside the kid who thinks bravery is impossible. You show them it's just the next right step." He listened, thumb tracing circles on my shoulder, but his eyes stayed on the ceiling. The pushback came gently. I signed up to fight fires, not feelings. Still, the town began to hum. The barista at Dollop slipped an extra shot in my latte for the hero's wife. The hardware store owner taped a printout of the viral still. Jake silhouetted against orange flames next to the register. At the firehouse, the chief pulled Jake aside and said the mayor wanted a photo op. Jake declined, but the pride leaked through. Anyway, probies saluted when he walked past. The cook started serving Brennan burgers with extra bacon. Lincoln Park buzzed like a hive warming to spring. I felt my parents before I saw evidence. It started with the country club's monthly newsletter arriving in our mailbox, forwarded no note. Inside a grainy photo from the wedding, my solo walk down the aisle circled in red pen. Then came the unsigned postcard postmarked, "Lake Forest Curiosity killed the cat." I recognized Mother's fountain pen, the way the T's crossed like tiny guillotines. At the grocery store, Mrs. Langford pretended to study avocados while watching me from the corner of her eye. The whispers had migrated north, sharpened into something colder. I caught Elise's name on a society blog, "Whitmore heiress dodges family scandal details at 11. They were watching, waiting for the marriage to combust so they could say they told me so. The knowledge settled in my stomach like cold lead, but it also lit a fire. Let them watch. Let them see what real loyalty looked like. Caroline called again on a Tuesday, voice pitched higher with excitement. "We're locked for the 22nd. Studios booked, crews ready. Just need your yes." Jake was on shift. I took the message. That night I laid out the contract on the kitchen table next to the chipped mug that held his spare change. "One segment," I said. 10 minutes. Then we go back to normal." He stared at the papers as if they might bite. "Normal doesn't include cameras in the rig," he muttered, but I saw the crack forming. The next morning, he signed scrawl neat and deliberate and handed the pen back like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Caroline whooped through the phone when I told her. "You won't regret this. America's going to fall in love." The buzz became a roar. Local stations ran teasers. Chicago firefighter saves elderly man wife, defies family fortune. The firehouse parking lot filled with news vans. Probies posed for selfies with the ladder truck. Jake kept his routine 0600 roll call equipment checks PT, but now every move was watched. I fielded calls from reporters wanting the society bride angle, politely declined, and felt the old Anna, the one who smiled for cameras at charity galas, stir beneath my skin. This time, the smile was mine to give, or withhold. On the day of the studio shoot, we arrived early. Jake in his dress blues, me in a simple navy sheath that cost less than my mother's weekly florist bill. The set was all warm wood and soft lighting, American flags draped just so. Caroline greeted us with hugs and coffee, then ushered Jake to makeup while I waited in the green room sipping water that tasted like plastic. The segment filmed smoothly, Jake recounting the warehouse call voice steady as he described cutting through the roll-up door, finding Mr. Harrington slumped beside pallets of burning cardboard. The clip played on the monitor behind him raw and unfiltered. Caroline asked about fear. Jake said fear was the smoke you moved through it, or it moved through you. When she turned to me asking how it felt to watch the man I loved risk everything I spoke from the hollow place the wedding had carved out. It feels like choosing him every day, even when the world says I shouldn't. The crew applauded when we wrapped. Caroline promised air date in 10 days. Jake loosened his tie in the hallway, relief plain on his face. Done, he said. Back to work tomorrow. We stepped out into the crisp evening city lights flickering on like a million small judgments. The crew packed equipment voices echoing off the brick alley behind the studio. I was fishing for my keys when movement caught my eye, a silhouette in a long, dark coat collar turned up against the wind slipping through the service door we'd just exited. The figure moved with the deliberate grace I'd watched my mother perfect at 1,000 galas shoulders back, chin high, the walk of a woman who expected doors to open. She disappeared inside before I could call out the door clicking shut behind her like a secret kept too long. I stood frozen in the alley, the cold brick wall at my back staring at the service door that had swallowed the dark-coated figure. Jake's hand settled on my elbow, warm through my sleeve. "Everything okay?" he asked, following my gaze. I shook my head, not trusting my voice, and let him guide me to the car. The drive home blurred past in streaks of neon and traffic lights, my mind replaying the elegant stride, the way the coat had swung like a cape. By the time we pulled into our parking space, I had convinced myself it was a trick of the light, a stranger who happened to walk like my mother. Sleep came in fits, haunted by the click of that door. 10 days later, we were back at the Michigan Avenue studio, this time under hot lights and a live audience. The set had been transformed. A replica of the warehouse door stood center stage, charred at the edges for effect, flanked by 2 oversized screens. Caroline Voss, in a crimson blazer sharp enough to cut glass, greeted us with air kisses and a clipboard. 5 minutes to air, she said, steering Jake to his mark. I took my seat in the front row of the audience, a sea of strangers clutching phone cameras and handwritten signs that read, "Hero" and "Thank you." The warmth of their attention wrapped around me like a blanket I hadn't realized I needed. A production assistant clipped a mic to my collar, whispered, "Just be yourself," and vanished into the shadows. The theme music swelled, patriotic and pulsing. Caroline strode onto the stage, smile wide, and the audience erupted. She introduced Jake with the reverence usually reserved for war veterans, and he stepped forward in his dress blues, the metal ribbon from the warehouse rescue gleaming on his chest. The lights dimmed, and the helmet cam footage rolled smoke so thick it looked solid. Jake's voice calm over the radio. "Victim located unconscious, beginning extraction." Then, the moment he emerged, cradling the elderly man against his turnout coat, flames roaring behind them like a living beast. The audience gasped in unison, a collective intake of breath that raised goosebumps on my arms. Caroline let the clip play to the end before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, Firefighter Jake Brennan, the man who walked through hell and carried hope out with him." Jake took the microphone stance easy the way he stood during roll call. He didn't pace or gesture, he simply told the story. Call came in at 02:17, 3-story commercial on the west side. We made entry through the loading dock. Heat was banked at 1200 degrees. I followed the hose line to the office suite, found Mr. Harrington slumped over his desk, pulse thready. No time for finesse, just get him out. He described the collapse of a shelving unit, the way he shielded the man with his body, the crawl through zero visibility, guided only by the sound of his own breathing in the mask. His voice never wavered, but I heard the subtext: every second counted, every choice mattered. The audience hung on every word, some wiping tears, others nodding like they'd been inside the smoke with him. Caroline leaned in. "Mr. Harrington recovered fully thanks to you. He's here tonight." The side door opened and a frail man in a navy blazer shuffled out, supported by a cane and a nurse. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. I clapped until my palms stung pride, swelling so fierce it hurt. Then Caroline asked the question that changed everything. Mr. Harrington, any relation to our guest Anna Brennan in the front row? The old man's eyes, sharp despite his age, found mine across the lights. Great niece, he said, voice raspy but clear. Claire's girl. Haven't seen her since she was knee-high. The audience gasped again, louder, this time a ripple of surprise that turned into murmurs. Phones lifted higher. Caroline's smile sharpened. So the man you saved is family to the woman you love. Jake, did you know? Jake shook his head, honest as always. Name on the manifest just said R. Harrington. Didn't make the connection until now. The cameras swung to me, and I felt the weight of 1,000 stares. I managed to smile, but inside my stomach flipped. Uncle Robert. Great-Uncle Robert hadn't spoken to my parents in 20 years, not since some falling out over the family trust. Yet here he was alive because of Jake smiling at me like we shared a secret. The applause thundered again, and Caroline milked it, asking Jake how it felt to save his wife's blood without knowing. Feels like the job, he said simply. Family or stranger you go in. The segment wrapped with a montage, slow-motion shots of Jake running drills, probies watching in awe, the firehouse dog wagging its tail. Caroline thanked us, the lights came up, and the audience surged forward for selfies and handshakes. I lost Jake in the crush, found him signing a little boy's cast with a Sharpie. Uncle Robert made his way to me, leaning heavily on his cane. Your mother's going to have kittens, he croaked, eyes twinkling. Good for you, girl. Before I could ask what he meant, a production assistant whisked him away for medical check. The crowd thinned, the lights dimmed to housekeeping levels, and I stood alone near the craft services table, sipping warm water from a paper cup. That was when I saw her. In the wings, half hidden behind a lighting rig, stood my mother. She wore the same dark coat from the alley, collar turned up, but her face was bare of the usual armor. Pearls gone, makeup smudged. Her eyes were red-rimmed, wet with tears that caught the stray beams like tiny prisms. She stared at the stage where Jake had stood, then at me. And for a moment, the distance between us felt like inches instead of miles. I took a step forward, mouth opening to call her name, but she lifted one gloved hand in a small, desperate gesture. Her lips moved, shaping words I could read across the dim space. We need to talk. Then a stagehand crossed between us, blocking my view, and when he passed, the wing was empty. The door to the corridor stood ajar, a slice of fluorescent light spilling onto the scuffed floor like an escape route. She was gone. The echo of the stage door still rang in my ears when Jake found me by the craft table. His dress blues, unbuttoned at the collar tie, loosened like a man shedding armor. Ready to get out of here, he asked, but my gaze stayed fixed on the empty wing where my mother had vanished. I nodded anyway, letting him steer me through the maze of cables and folding chairs, past crew members coiling cords, and Caroline Voss already on the phone planning follow-ups. The night air hit us outside sharp with November chill, and I pulled my coat tighter, the image of Mother's tear-streaked face burning behind my eyes. We drove home in near silence, the radio off, the city lights smearing across the windshield like wet paint. Jake kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on my knee, a quiet anchor. I wanted to tell him about the sighting, but the words stuck. Some ghosts needed daylight to be named. Sleep evaded me. I lay in the dark, listening to Jake's steady breathing, the occasional creak of the old radiator, and replayed the segment in my head. Uncle Robert's raspy voice claiming me as kin. The audience's gasp, Mother's silent plea. By dawn, I was up brewing coffee strong enough to strip varnish, scrolling through the flood of notifications on my phone. The clip had exploded overnight, now at Chicago hero trending nationwide, strangers tagging me in posts about love conquering class. One comment caught my eye, buried in a local news thread, Whitmore heir saved by own son-in-law, talk about karma. Attached was a grainy photo from 2010, a garage fire on the north side, firefighters emerging from smoke. I zoomed in, heart stuttering. The lead rescuer's silhouette, the way he carried the victim fireman style across his shoulders. It was Jake. The victim's face was obscured by an oxygen mask, but the monogrammed cuff of the shirt peeking out read, R.W. Richard Whitmore. My father. I printed the photo on our ancient printer, the ink smudging slightly, and waited for Jake to wake. When he shuffled into the kitchen, hair-tousled eyes still heavy with sleep, I slid the page across the table. Tell me about this call, I said, voice steadier than I felt. He squinted, then recognition dawned. Yeah. 2010. Late October. Detached garage, high-end neighborhood. Guy working on his classic car space heater tipped ignited fumes. We got there fast, but the smoke was thick carbon monoxide city. I went in solo after the line backed up. Found him on the concrete out cold. Carried him out, handed him to EMS. Standard save. He shrugged, pouring coffee as if he hadn't just rewritten my family history. Why? Because the man you pulled from that garage was my father. The words formed but didn't leave my mouth. I needed proof, something beyond a blurry photo and Jake's memory. I kissed him goodbye as he left for shift, then drove to the Central Records office downtown, the one that kept fire reports public after 10 years. The clerk, a woman with a name tag reading Dolores, pulled the file without comment. Inside were incident reports, paramedic notes, and a single medical summary from Northwestern Memorial. I flipped to the toxicology page. COHB level 42% consistent with prolonged exposure. Then the neurology consult dated 3 days. Post-incident patient reports, vivid recall of events prior to loss of consciousness, but no memory of rescue or rescuer's identity. Diagnosis: selective retrograde amnesia, secondary to carbon monoxide poisoning. Likely permanent for facial recognition of individual involved. I read it twice, the clinical language slicing through 15 years of my father's disdain. He didn't remember Jake because his brain had erased the face that saved him. I tucked the file under my arm and drove north the expressway, a gray ribbon under a heavier sky. Lake Forest looked smaller in daylight, the mansions less imposing, the gates less forbidding. Mrs. Delgado answered the door in her usual crisp apron, eyes widening at the sight of me. Miss Anna, your parents are. I cut her off with a look and climbed the stairs to Father's study. He sat behind the desk, glasses perched low, reviewing blueprints for a new retail plaza. He glanced up, surprise flickering before the familiar mask slid into place. To what do I owe this intrusion? He asked, voice clipped. I laid the medical file on the desk between us, open to the amnesia diagnosis. 2010 garage fire. You were the victim. Jake Brennan was the firefighter who carried you out. I watched his face for recognition, for shame, for anything. Nothing. He adjusted his glasses, scanned the page, then pushed it back toward me. I recall the incident, yes. Faulty heater insurance covered the damage. I don't recall the personnel. His tone was final, the way he ended board meetings. If this Brennan boy claims some debt, tell him the Whitmores pay their bills. He's not claiming anything, I said, heat rising. He's my husband. The man you called beneath us. The one you refused to watch marry me. Father's pen paused mid-signature, but his expression stayed marble. I meet dozens of first responders at charity events. Faces blur. If he was there, it's irrelevant. Irrelevant. The word landed like a slap. I gathered the file fingers, trembling. You don't remember because the poison erased him. Not because he doesn't matter. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. Anna, sentimentality is a luxury we can't afford. Some bridges are burned for good reason. I didn't answer. The bridge wasn't burned. It had never been built. Back home, I spread the documents across the dining table. The medical summary, the incident report. The photo of Jake emerging from smoke with Father draped over his shoulder like a fallen king. Jake came in at dusk, smelling of engine grease and cold air. I showed him everything. He read in silence, then folded the papers neatly and set them aside. He doesn't remember, he said, not a question. Doesn't change the job. His calm infuriated me. It changes everything, I insisted. He owes you his life. Jake shook his head. I don't keep score. Neither should you. But I couldn't let it go. The injustice gnawed a splinter under the skin. That night after Jake fell asleep, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. No area code. The text glowed in the dark. Ask about the night your father forgot. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred the same chill from the chapel aisle crawling up my spine. Someone knew. Someone was watching. The anonymous text glowed on my phone like a coal I couldn't drop. I thumbed the screen dark, but the words stayed lit behind my eyelids. Ask about the night your father forgot. Jake slept beside me, one arm flung across the pillow, breathing slow and even the way he did after a long shift. I slipped from bed, bare feet cold on the hardwood, and padded to the hallway closet where we'd stored the last box from my childhood bedroom things my parents had shipped after the wedding with a note that read, "Out of sight." The carton was sealed with the same crimson tape Mother used for Christmas gifts, the kind that left sticky scars. I sliced it open with a kitchen knife, the blade catching on layers of tissue and bubble wrap. Inside lay yearbooks, debutante gloves, a silver rattle I'd never let my own child touch. At the bottom, wrapped in yellowed newsprint, was a small cedar box I didn't recognize. The lid was carved with a simple flame, no initials, no lock. I carried it to the living room lamp and eased it open. Dust motes danced in the weak bulb. On top rested a single sheet of heavy cotton paper folded once the creases soft from years of handling. The date at the top read, August 12th, 1980. Written in fountain pen ink that had browned but not faded. My grandfather's handwriting, bold, slanted, impatient with margins. I knew it from birthday cards and the rare postcard from his fishing cabin up in Wisconsin. I unfolded the letter carefully as though it might crumble. My dearest Claire and Richard, if you are reading this, I am gone and the lake house has passed to you as I always intended. I write not about brick or timber, but about the people who keep brick and timber standing. Last week, a fire took the old cannery on the South Pier. 3 alarms whined off the water, the whole town holding its breath. I stood with the crowd and watched men I'd never shaken hands with run into a building that was already lost. One of them carried out Tommy Brennan, yes, the same Brennan boy who mows our lawn every Saturday. Tommy's lungs were full of smoke, but he will live because those firefighters treated his life as equal to any board members. I gave the captain a check for new turnout gear. He tried to refuse. I insisted. Money is easy. Gratitude is harder. I have watched you both grow into fine adults, but I have also watched the distance between your hearts and the hands that built this city. Claire, you flinch when the gardener's boy tracks dirt across the veranda. Richard, you measure a man by the car he drives. I did the same once, and it cost me friends I never replaced. Do not repeat my mistake. The world is held together by everyday heroes, plumbers at 3 a.m., nurses on double shifts, firefighters who never ask your net worth before they kick in the door. Honor them. Invite them to dinner. Let your children play with theirs. Drop the pride that says some lives matter more because they were born behind taller gates. This letter is my last request. Read it aloud at my memorial if you must, but live it every day after. The lake house is yours, but the legacy is theirs, the ones who run toward the flame while the rest of us run away. With all my love. Grandfather Robert. I read it twice, the paper trembling slightly in my fingers. Grandfather had died when I was 12. A heart attack on the golf course, his putter still in hand. I remembered the funeral black limousines, white gladiolus. Mother dry-eyed and perfect. No one had mentioned firefighters. No one had read this aloud. I turned the letter over, searching for more, and felt something stiff tucked into the fold. A photograph slid free and fluttered to the rug. I picked it up, brushed off the dust, and felt the air leave my lungs. It was a Polaroid. The colors softened by time, but unmistakable. A young woman in a Chicago Fire Department dress uniform, helmet tucked under one arm, soot streaking her cheeks. In her other arm, she cradled a small child no more than 5, face blackened, eyes wide with shock. The woman's jaw was set, but her grip on the boy was tender, protective. Something about the tilt of her head, the way her hair escaped the bun in wisps, struck me like a bell. I flipped the photo. On the back, in the same impatient script, Claire, 1985. Never forget why we serve. The room tilted. My mother in turnout gear holding a burned child. The date 5 years after the letter, 25 years before, she would stand in a chapel and call my marriage a mistake. I sat back on my heels, the cedar box open beside me like a confession. All the pieces I'd collected, the amnesia report, the garage fire, the anonymous text, suddenly had context. Grandfather had begged them to see beyond class, to honor the very people they now scorned. Mother had once worn the uniform, had carried a child from flames, had known the weight of the job in her bones. And Father, who couldn't remember the face that saved him, had been handed a legacy he'd chosen to ignore. The letter wasn't just words. It was a mirror they had turned to the wall. I folded it carefully, slipped it back into the box, and closed the lid. The Polaroid I kept in my hand, the image of my mother as a firefighter, burning brighter than any society portrait. Morning light crept through the blinds, painting stripes across the rug. Jake would be up soon, needing coffee before his shift. I would show him the letter, the photograph, let him read the plea in his own time. But first, I needed to understand how completely my parents had buried their past. The anonymous text still waited on my phone, a shadow behind the light. Someone out there knew the history I was only now uncovering. I pressed the Polaroid to my chest and felt the faint ridge of the emulsion, the ghost of a moment my mother had never shared. The legacy wasn't lost. It had been hidden. And now it was mine to reclaim. The Polaroid trembled in my fingers as I carried it to the kitchen table, the morning light slanting through the blinds and catching the soot on the young woman's cheek. I set it beside Grandfather's letter, the two artifacts side by side like puzzle pieces that had waited decades to fit. Jake shuffled in, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and stopped short at the sight of the cedar box. "Morning archaeology?" he asked, voice rough. I handed him the photograph without a word. He studied it, brow furrowing, then flipped it to read the back. His breath caught a small, sharp sound. "Claire," he said, the name barely audible. "That's your mom." I nodded, throat tight. "Look at the kid." He did, and the color drained from his face. "That's me." We pieced it together slowly, the way you reassemble a shattered vase, knowing it will never be perfect, but needing to see the shape. Jake remembered fragments, the warehouse on the south side, the summer he turned 5, the day his father took him to watch a controlled burn demonstration. A spark jumped a pallet, ignited, the crowd scattered. He recalled heat then, arms lifting him, a woman's voice calm against his ear. "I've got you, buddy." Then nothing until the hospital, his parents hovering a bandage on his forearm. The woman had vanished into the chaos. His mother called her an angel. His father called her a rookie who got lucky. No name, no follow-up. Jake had never connected the memory to my mother because Claire Whitmore had erased every trace of Officer Claire from our lives. I drove to the public library's microfiche room, the one tucked behind the genealogy section where retirees traced ancestors. The 1985 Chicago Tribune archives were brittle, the ink flaking like dandruff. I found the article on page 7 of the Metro section, warehouse training exercise turns, real rookie firefighter saves child. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. My mother helmet under one arm, carrying a small boy whose face was turned away from the camera. The caption read, "Officer Claire Whitmore, 25, credited with quick action." I printed the page, the machine whirring like an old friend. Another file from the fire department's internal newsletter listed commendations. Claire Whitmore, probationary firefighter, awarded Medal of Valor for civilian rescue. The date matched the Polaroid. I sat back, the chair creaking, and felt the circle close with a click that echoed in my bones. Mother had saved Jake. Jake had saved Father. The universe had been knitting us together long before I met him at that charity auction. Back home, I dug deeper. The cedar box held more than the letter and photo. Beneath a layer of tissue lay a small velvet pouch. Inside was a metal, bronze and heavy, The ribbon faded to the color of dried blood. The inscription read, "For Valor, Chicago Fire Department, 1985. I turned it over. C. Whitmore. Jake took it from my palm thumb, tracing the engraving. "She never told you," he said. I shook my head. Mother had quit 6 months after the rescue, the records showed. No explanation, just a resignation letter citing personal reasons. I could guess the rest. Grandfather's plea in 1980 had been ignored. By 1985, the pressure was unbearable. A Whitmore in turnout gear was a scandal. Father, already climbing the corporate ladder, would have seen it as a liability. They buried the medal, the uniform, the memory. Mother became the perfect society wife, chairing galas instead of charging hoses. The child she saved grew up to marry her daughter, and the man he saved couldn't remember his face. The irony tasted like ash. I confronted the truth in the quiet of our apartment, the medal on the table between us like a silent witness. Jake listened as I read the resignation letter aloud, my voice steady only because I'd practiced in the car. "She walked away," I said. "She chose their version of legacy over hers." Jake's eyes were soft. "She was 25. Scared. People make choices they regret." I wanted to argue, to rage at the cowardice, but the circle held me still. Mother had run into fire once. Jake had done it 1,000 times. Father had been carried out blind to the debt. The legacy wasn't lost. It had been passed in secret from her arms to his, from his to mine. I slipped the medal into Jake's hand. "This belongs to you now," I said. He started to protest, but I closed his fingers around it. "She saved you. You saved him. Wear it for both of them." The weight of the revelation settled over the next days, a new gravity in our home. Jake wore the medal under his t-shirt on his next shift, the ribbon hidden but the bronze warm against his skin. I framed the Polaroid and hung it in the hallway next to our wedding photo, the two images side by side, mother carrying child, husband carrying father. The circle was complete, a loop of courage and blindness, love and denial. I thought the story had found its shape, that the past had finally spoken. Then the mail arrived. It came on a Thursday, slipped between catalogs and bills. A plain manila envelope with no return address. My name typed in block letters. I opened it in the kitchen, the medal glinting on the counter where Jake had left it that morning. Inside was a single sheet photocopied from an insurance claim dated 2010. Richard Whitmore Garage. Fire total loss. $187,000 paid in full. A yellow highlighter circled the signature line, father's name, but the handwriting was off the loops too, round the pressure, too light. Beneath the copy, a note in the same block letters, $200K in cash. Or this goes public. The garage fire wasn't an accident. Ask your father who really signed the claim. I stared at the words until they blurred the circle, tightening into a noose. The paper shook in my hand until the highlighter bled into a sickly sun. I set the envelope on the counter, careful as though it might explode, and stared at the forged signature that was supposed to be my father's. The loops were too perfect, the slant too gentle, someone had practiced. Jake was on a 24. The apartment felt cavernous without him. I took a photo of every page, uploaded it to a cloud folder labeled Insurance, then slid the originals into a freezer bag and buried them beneath the ice trays. My pulse hammered in my ears, but my mind was suddenly brutally clear. Whoever sent this knew the garage fire inside out. They knew the payout. They knew the lie. And they wanted 200,000 reasons to keep quiet. I needed a name. The return address was blank, but the postmark read, Evanston. A suburb my family had once considered beneath us. I opened my laptop and started digging. The insurance claim listed the adjuster Marlene Kopecki, retired. A quick search turned up an obituary from 2018. Cause of death, heart failure. Dead end. The policy number, however, led to a scanned PDF on the carrier's public portal. The signature page was crisp, the forgery glaring under zoom. I cross-referenced the claim date November 3rd, 2010, with the fire report Jake had pulled weeks earlier. Same incident, same payout, but a second signature appeared on the release form, R. Harrington Witness. My great-uncle Robert had co-signed the settlement. The same Robert who had shuffled onto the TV stage cane tapping calling me great-niece with a twinkle. The same Robert who hadn't spoken to my parents in 20 years. I called the nursing home where Uncle Robert now lived. The receptionist patched me through to his room. "Anna." "My dear," he croaked, voice like dry leaves. "Saw you on the television. Proud of that husband of yours." I cut to the chase. "Uncle Robert, did you sign anything for Dad after the garage fire?" Silence, then a cough. "Your father asked me to witness." Said his hand was shaky from the hospital meds. I signed. End of story. I pressed. "Was anyone else there?" Another pause longer. His brother stopped by. "Wanted to help." I thought it was kindness. My stomach dropped. Dad doesn't have a brother. Uncle Robert chuckled thin and bitter. "No, but I do. Robert Jr. We're twins. He's the reason I left the family money to charity. Mean streak a mile wide. Robert Jr. I'd never heard the name. A quick search of public records turned up a birth certificate, Robert James Harrington Jr., born the same day as my great-uncle. Same hospital, different mother. Illegitimate, erased from the family Bible. He'd bounced through low-level fraud convictions in 3 states, always slipping the net. The last address was a P.O. box in Evanston. The pieces clicked. Junior had watched his twin inherit everything, nursed the grudge for decades, then saw the garage fire as payday. He forged Dad's signature, pocketed a cut of the insurance, and now wanted more. The blackmail letter was his encore. I needed proof that would hold in court. I drafted an email from a burner account, concerned niece worried about family secrets, and asked to meet to discuss the documents. The reply came within minutes. "Tomorrow noon, the bench by the Evanston Dog Park. Bring cash or don't come." I forwarded the thread to a detective contact Jake trusted, then set my phone to record. Audio, slipped it into my coat pocket, and drove north. The park was nearly empty, wind whipping off the lake, dogs chasing frisbees in frantic arcs. Robert Jr. sat on the bench, thinner than his twin, hair dyed and unnatural black eyes darting like a cornered fox. He didn't stand when I approached. "You're late," he snapped. I sat, leaving a careful foot of space. "I'm here. Talk." He slid a manila folder across the wood. Inside were photocopies of the forged claim bank statements showing a wire transfer to an offshore account, and a handwritten ledger titled Whitmore Payoff Phase 1. His voice was nasal, triumphant. "Your old man was half dead in the hospital. I signed for him. Adjuster was my girlfriend's cousin. Easy money. But greed's a ladder, sweetheart. 200 large keeps the ladder steady. You pay, or the feds get an anonymous tip about felony fraud. Your daddy does time. Your pretty hero husband's save becomes a joke." He leaned closer, breath sour with coffee. "Cash. Small bills. 1 week." My phone recorded every word, the microphone picking up the rustle of pages, the distant bark of a poodle. I kept my face neutral. "How do I know you'll destroy the originals?" He laughed, a sound like tearing paper. "You don't. That's the beauty." I nodded, stood, and walked away without another word. In the car, I stopped the recording, emailed the file to the detective with a single line: felony extortion live capture. My hands shook, but the plan was solid. Robert Jr. thought he held the cards. He didn't know I'd just dealt him out. I drove home through rush-hour traffic, the blackmail folder locked in the glove box. Jake would be off shift soon. I'd play him the audio, let him hear the venom in Junior's voice. We'd hand everything to the authorities, watch the noose tighten from the right side. The circle of rescue and betrayal was almost closed. I pulled into our complex, waved at the security guard, and parked beneath the buzzing street lamp. Inside the apartment, I set my keys in the bowl, kicked off my shoes, and reached for the light switch. The room stayed dark. I frowned, flipped it again. Nothing. Then I noticed the small LED on the bookshelf, the security camera Jake had installed after a rash of car break-ins. The red light was off. I crossed the room, heart suddenly loud. The camera lens stared back, blank and lifeless. Someone had unplugged it, or worse. The screen on the wall monitor showed only static. Our home feed was black. The darkness of the security monitor stared back like a dead eye, and the apartment suddenly felt too large, too quiet. I reached for the light switch again uselessly, then fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut across the living room, catching the edge of the coffee table, the couch cushions, the framed Polaroid on the wall. Nothing moved. I forced my breathing to slow, stepped to the camera, and traced the power cord. It was unplugged cleanly, deliberately. Someone had been inside. Jake wouldn't be home for hours. I locked the deadbolt, slid the chain, and wedged a chair under the knob for good measure. Then I called the building super, left a terse voicemail about a possible break-in, and sat on the couch with the blackmail folder clutched to my chest, waiting for daylight. Morning came gray and reluctant. Jake arrived just after 7, still in his turnout pants, eyes bloodshot from a structure fire in Pilsen. I met him at the door, handed him coffee, and played the security footage from my phone backup. The timestamp showed 2:14 a.m. A gloved hand reaching from the hallway, yanking the plug. No face, no build, just a shadow that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Jake's jaw tightened. "We're changing the locks today," he said. "And I'm calling in a favor at the precinct." I nodded, but my mind was already racing ahead to the blackmail envelope, to Robert Jr.'s smug voice in the park. The break-in felt connected, a warning shot. We spent the day installing new deadbolts, a louder alarm, and a second camera aimed at the front door. By evening, the apartment felt fortified, but the knot in my stomach refused to loosen. The summons came 2 days later, hand-delivered by a courier in a crisp navy suit. I signed for the thick envelope, my name typed in severe block letters, and carried it inside. Jake was at the station. I opened it alone. The cover letter was on heavy cream stock, the same shade as the wedding invitations my parents had shredded. Whitmore and Associates, attorneys at law. The complaint was 20 pages of legalese, but the gist was brutal. Richard and Claire Whitmore versus Anna Brennan. Defamation per se, seeking $5 million in damages and a permanent injunction against further public statements. The exhibits included screenshots of my TV interview, the viral clip of Jake carrying Uncle Robert, and a sworn affidavit from my father claiming I had fabricated a narrative of familial estrangement for personal gain. The final paragraph demanded I issue a public retraction and sever all ties with Jacob Brennan within 30 days, or face accelerated judgment. I read it twice, the words swimming. Defamation. $5 million. Sever ties. The paper felt hot in my hands. My phone buzzed, "Mother." I let it ring out, then listened to the voicemail. Her voice was ice over steel. "Anna, the papers have been served. This ends now. Leave the firefighter, come home, and we'll drop the suit. Continue this circus and we will bury you in court. Your choice." The message clicked off. I played it again, searching for a crack, a tremor. Anything human. There was none. I forwarded the audio to our lawyer, a woman Jake's captain had recommended, then called Jake. He answered on the first ring. "I'm on my way," he said before I finished a sentence. He walked in 20 minutes later, helmet under one arm, and read the complaint in silence. When he looked up, his eyes were steady. "They want you to choose between your name and me." I nodded. I already chose. The words came out stronger than I felt. He set the papers down, took my face in his hands, and kissed my forehead the way he did after bad calls. Then we fight together. We spent the evening with the lawyer on speaker, mapping strategy, truth, as absolute defense, public records of the garage fire, the blackmail recording. The stakes were no longer social. They were financial, reputational, existential. $5 million could wipe us out. An injunction could silence us forever. But walking away from Jake was unthinkable. I had burned that bridge in ashes long ago. The next betrayal came from a quarter I never expected. Lisa had been my roommate freshman year, the one who held my hair during finals week and danced at my engagement party. She'd gone quiet after the wedding, but I chalked it up to busy schedules. Then my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number, a screenshot of an email from Lisa to my mother. Subject: Anna's lies. The body was concise: Claire. Anna has been spreading falsehoods about family abandonment. I've known her since college. She's always exaggerated for attention. Happy to provide affidavit if needed. The signature was Lisa's complete, with her signature emoji, a tiny champagne glass. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Lisa, who had cried at my vows, who had toasted to love that doesn't care about zip codes, now siding with the people who called my marriage a mistake. I called her. She answered on the third ring, voice syrupy. Anna. Hey, I was just... Explain the email. Silence, then a sigh. Your parents reached out. They're hurting. I thought if I corroborated their side, you'd see reason. Reason. As if love were a negotiation. You're testifying against me, I asked. Another pause. I'm protecting you from yourself. The line went dead. I stood in the kitchen phone, still at my ear, the dial tone buzzing like a hornet. Jake took the phone, read the screenshot, and pulled me into his chest. She made her choice, he said. We make ours. We filed our answer the next morning, denying every allegation attaching the insurance forgery and the park recording as counterclaims for extortion. The legal meter was running, but the line was drawn. I refused to leave. Jake refused to retract a truth that had cost me everything else. The apartment felt smaller under the weight of the fight, but Jake's presence filled it steady, unshakable. We cooked dinner together, pasta and jarred sauce, the simplest meal we'd had in weeks. He twirled spaghetti on his fork and said, "Whatever they throw, we catch it together." I believed him. The circle of rescue and betrayal had narrowed to us against them, and I was done running. 3 days later, the courier returned. This time, the envelope was thinner green, certified mail sticker glaring. I signed with a hand that didn't shake. Inside was a single sheet. Summons and complaint. Lisa M. Callahan, vs. Anna Brennan. Civil slander seeking $1 million and punitive damages. The allegations mirrored my parents' falsehoods, reputational harm, emotional distress. Lisa's affidavit was attached 3 pages of half-truths and outright lies. I read it in the hallway, the door still open, the courier already gone. Jake came up the stairs, saw my face, and took the papers. His silence was louder than any curse. We stood there, summons in hand, the legal noose tightening from 2 directions. The certified envelope lay open on the kitchen table like a second wound, Lisa's signature glaring up at us in black and white. Jake set his coffee down, untouched, the steam curling between us like a question neither of us wanted to answer. Our lawyer had warned that countersuits would escalate everything, but silence felt like surrender. I looked at the stack of evidence we had gathered, the Polaroid, the medical file, grandfather's letter, and felt the shape of a different kind of weapon. Not a courtroom, but a camera. Caroline Voss had left 3 voicemails since the first segment, each more urgent than the last. America wants the rest of the story, she'd said. I dialed her back before Jake could protest. We filmed 3 days later, primetime live, from the same Michigan Avenue studio. The set had been redressed, a simple oak table, 2 chairs, a single spotlight. No charred warehouse door this time, just truth stripped bare. Caroline introduced us with the gravity of a war correspondent. Tonight, Anna and Jake Brennan returned to answer accusations of defamation and fraud that have rocked Chicago's elite. The audience was smaller, invitation only, but the red tally lights on the cameras burned like judgment. I wore the navy sheath from the first shoot. Jake wore his dress blues, the Medal of Valor now pinned openly above his pocket. We took our seats, hands linked under the table, and Caroline began. She started with the lawsuits, projecting the summonses on the screen behind us. $5 million from my parents. $1 million from Lisa. The audience murmured. Then she turned to me. Anna, your family claims you fabricated a narrative of abandonment. Your response, I opened the leather folio we had prepared. First, the Polaroid enlarged to poster size. My mother at 25, soot-streaked cradling 5-year-old Jake. Gasps rippled through the seats. This is Claire Whitmore, rookie firefighter 1985. She saved my husband's life 38 years before he saved my father's. Caroline let the image linger, then nodded to Jake. He laid the medical file on the table, the amnesia diagnosis highlighted in calm clinical yellow. 2010. Carbon monoxide poisoning erased my face from Richard Whitmore's memory. He doesn't remember the rescue because his brain can't. The camera zoomed in on the neurology report, the words, "Selective retrograde amnesia," stark against the page. Jake's voice stayed level. He calls it irrelevant. I call it Tuesday. A nervous laugh escaped the audience, quickly hushed. I unfolded grandfather's letter, last the paper soft from decades of handling. I read it aloud, every word about everyday heroes, every plea to drop class pride. When I reached the line about firefighters running toward the flame while the rest of us run away, a woman in the front row dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Caroline's voice was quiet. Your parents have never acknowledged this letter publicly. I shook my head. They buried it with the medal my mother earned for saving Jake. The screen flashed, the bronze disc ribbon faded, but inscription clear. C. Whitmore, for valor. The segment was only 12 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. Caroline opened the phone lines. The first caller, a nurse from Milwaukee, pledged $500 to a firefighter relief fund in Jake's name. The second, a retired teacher, matched it. By the time we cut to commercial, the chyron read, donations $47,000 and climbing. Social media exploded. Brennan Truth trending. Within minutes, strangers posting screenshots of Venmo transfers, firehouses across the country, pledging shifts worth of overtime. The fund, hastily set up by Caroline's producers, hit $250,000 before we left the studio. People weren't just watching. They were choosing sides. The crack in my parents' reputation came faster than concrete in frost. The Lake Forest Country Club removed their names from the upcoming gala program. Too much controversy. The chairwoman texted a friend who texted me. A society columnist who once fawned over mother's floral arrangements now ran a blind item, which North Shore matriarch once wore turnout gear, but now sues her own flesh and blood. The Whitmore's annual holiday card list leaked by an anonymous source showed half the names crossed out in red pen. Their silence was deafening. No statement, no rebuttal, just the slow bleed of influence they had spent decades accumulating. Jake and I walked out of the studio into a night that felt lighter, the city lights softer. Caroline hugged us both, eyes shining. You just changed the narrative, she said. The donations ticker on my phone kept climbing $750,000 by midnight, $1 million by dawn. Firefighters' widows, burn victims' scholarship funds, all receiving checks none of us had imagined. We drove home in a daze, the radio off the windows cracked to let in the cold. Jake's hand rested on my thigh, warm and steady. They can't buy this back, he said. I believed him. The truth was out, and money couldn't bury it again. We were halfway through the lobby when security waved us over. Mr. Brennan, your father-in-law's here. Stormed past the desk, says it's urgent. My stomach lurched. Jake's grip tightened. We took the elevator to the studio's backstage corridor, the same hallway where Mother had vanished weeks ago. The door to the green room stood ajar. Father filled the frame, suit-rumpled tie, askew face, flushed with something between rage and desperation. He didn't wait for us to speak. You don't know why I really fought the wedding, he shouted, voice cracking across the monitors. You think it was pride? You think it was class? Turn the cameras back on. I'll tell you everything. Father's words ricocheted off the cinder block walls, raw and ragged, but the red tally lights on the cameras were already dark. A producer stepped between us, palms raised. Sir, we're off air. Security's on the way. Father's chest heaved. his eyes locked on mine, wild with something I couldn't name. Jake moved to my side shoulder, brushing mine a silent wall. I opened my mouth to demand answers, but my phone buzzed in my pocket, an incoming call from an unknown number. I silenced it. Another buzz, then another. Texts this time, screenshots flooding in from friends I hadn't heard from in months. Lisa's face filled every screen, grainy but unmistakable, sitting in a coffee shop I recognized from college. The caption beneath the photo read, "Paid to lie, $50K. My stomach dropped. I pulled Jake into the corridor away from Father's glare and opened the first message. It was a voice memo timestamped 2 days earlier, forwarded from an anonymous account. I pressed play. Lisa's voice nervous but clear. "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore. The money hit my account this morning. 50,000, just like we discussed. I'll file the affidavit tomorrow. Emotional distress. Reputational harm. The works. Anna's been unstable since the wedding. Everyone knows it." A pause, then Mother's clipped reply. "Make it convincing. We end this." The recording cut off. I played it again, volume low, the words slicing deeper each time. Jake's jaw clenched so hard I heard the click. "She sold you," he said. I nodded, numb. The screenshots kept coming, bank transfer confirmations, emails, scheduling strategy sessions, even a selfie Lisa had taken with the deposit slip captioned "Easy Money." We drove home in silence, the city a blur of brake lights and sirens. I forwarded everything to our lawyer, then to the detective handling the extortion case. By morning, the recording was everywhere, leaked to local blogs, picked up by national outlets, dissected on morning radio. Lisa's lawsuit, filed with such righteous indignation, now looked like a paid hit. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing for noon. Jake had a shift but called in a favor. We both walked into the courtroom, evidence binder thick in my hands. Lisa sat at the plaintiff's table, blonde hair pulled tight, suit expensive but eyes darting. Her attorney, a man with a tie too shiny, tried to object to the late filing, but the judge waved him off. "Play it," she said. The courtroom speakers crackled with Lisa's voice, the $50,000 confession echoing off mahogany panels. Gasps rippled through the gallery, reporters, curious neighbors, a few firehouse probies who had come to support Jake. Lisa's face went chalk white. Her lawyer stammered about authenticity, but the bank records matched the audio timestamp to the minute. The judge didn't need long. Motion to dismiss with prejudice, she ruled, gavel sharp. Plaintiff's claims lack any basis in good faith. Case closed. Costs to Ms. Callahan. Lisa stood as if to speak, then bolted, heels clacking down the aisle. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse. By evening, her name was mud. The collapse rippled outward. The country club's board voted to suspend my parents' membership pending review, too much negative press. Invitations to holiday parties were rescinded with polite regrets. A rival developer pulled out of a joint venture, citing reputational risk. Mother's charity, the one she had chaired for 15 years, saw donations plummet. The annual gala was canceled for lack of sponsors. Father's name vanished from the donor wall at the art museum. Whispered conversations at the grocery store, the gas station, the pediatrician's office all carried the same refrain. Can you believe the Whitmores paid to smear their own daughter? The fortress they had built with money and manners cracked from the inside out. Jake and I watched it unfold from our couch, the Firefighter fund now topping $3 million, every dollar a vote of confidence. We didn't celebrate. There was no joy in watching people fall. But there was relief, a loosening of the fist that had gripped my chest since the wedding. Lisa's betrayal stung deepest, not the money, but the ease with which she had traded our history for a paycheck. I deleted her number, blocked her on every platform, and felt the last thread snap. The community had chosen. They stood with the truth with us. That night we ate takeout on paper plates, too tired to cook. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from the detective juniors in custody, singing like a canary. I was about to ask for details when my own phone lit up a live feed from a local news chopper. The camera panned over Lake Forest, past manicured hedges and wrought iron gates to the Whitmore estate. Blue lights pulsed against the stone facade, reflecting off the fountain where Elise and I once floated paper boats. 2 cruisers blocked the driveway officers at the door. Father stood on the porch in shirt sleeves, hands raised, mother behind him, clutching her pearls. The chyron crawled across the screen. Fraud investigation, Whitmore Mansion. The feed cut to commercial, but the image burned into my retinas. The television screen went black, but the blue strobes kept pulsing behind my eyelids long after the remote slipped from my fingers. Jake muted the volume, yet the silence in our apartment felt louder than any siren. I refreshed the local news app every 30 seconds, watching the same 30-second clip loop, officers on the porch. Mother's silhouette frozen in the doorway. Father's arms half raised as if surrendering to the night itself. At 5:47 a.m., the push alert finally came. Robert J. Harrington, Jr., 73, arrested on felony insurance fraud and extortion charges. Booking photo attached, thin face, dyed hair, eyes hollow with the shock of handcuffs. I forwarded the link to our lawyer, then to the detective, then simply stared at the ceiling until Jake's alarm chimed for his shift. By 7, the story had legs. Robert Jr. had rolled overnight, trading a lighter sentence for a full confession. The U.S. Attorney's Office released a statement: forged signatures, staged damage reports, kickbacks from a complicit adjuster. The garage fire payout, $187,000, had been split 3 ways, with Jr. pocketing the largest share. He named dates, dollar amounts, even the offshore account where the money had slept for 13 years. The extortion demand for $200,000 was the encore, a desperate grab when the statute clock started ticking. Cuffs snapped on at dawn in a cheap Evanston motel, the same town whose postmark had started this unraveling. Justice tasted metallic like blood after a punch you didn't see coming. Father's apology aired live at 9, streamed on every local channel, and picked up nationally within the hour. The network set up a makeshift podium on the courthouse steps, gray sky, threatening snow. He wore the same rumpled shirt from the porch cam tie, gone hair uncombed. Microphones clustered like vultures. He didn't wait for questions. "I stand here a humbled man," he began, voice cracking on the first syllable. Cameras zoomed tight. I allowed greed to blind me. I signed documents I shouldn't have looked away when I should have asked. Worse, I turned my back on my daughter and the hero who saved my life. He dropped to one knee, concrete biting through his slacks, and the gesture was so unlike him, Richard Whitmore, who never bent for anyone, that the crowd gasped. "Anna Jake, I am sorry. For the lies, the lawsuits, the pride that poisoned everything. I remember nothing of that night in the garage, but I will remember this moment every day I have left." Tears tracked clean lines through the stubble on his cheeks. He stayed down until a reporter helped him up, then walked away without another word, flanked by attorneys who looked shell-shocked. The mansion went on the market that afternoon. The listing photos appeared before lunch: 12 bedrooms, 8 baths, 4 acres on the lake, asking $28 million. The broker's notes were brutally candid, motivated sellers, quick, close proceeds to settle legal claims. By evening, the price dropped $2 million, then another $3 million. Virtual tours showed empty rooms. Artwork gone, the grand piano under a dust sheet. Neighbors who once curtsied at mother's garden parties now slowed their cars to gawk. A moving van idled in the circular drive, workers carrying out crates labeled "fragile" in red. The fall was public, relentless, and absolute. Jake came home at dusk, soot still clinging to his cuffs from a kitchen fire in Humboldt Park. I met him with the listing on my tablet. He scrolled, expression unreadable, then set it down. "They're selling the house to pay lawyers," he said. I nodded. "And maybe to pay us back." The Firefighter fund had crossed $4 million. Every donation carried a note, some angry, some grateful, all choosing our side. We ate leftover lasagna, standing at the counter, the television on mute, the mansion's for sale sign flashing in the corner of every broadcast. Father's kneel replayed on a loop, the image that would define him now. Night settled cold and clear. I was rinsing plates when the doorbell rang, unexpected sharp. Jake checked the new peephole, then opened to a courier in a navy blazer. Same firm that had served the lawsuits. This envelope was thinner, unmarked. I signed, heart already racing. Inside was a single check drawn on the Whitmore Family Trust payable to the Grandfather's Flame Foundation. The amount $2,500,000. The memo line read simply, "For valor." The signatures at the bottom were shaky but unmistakable. Richard Whitmore, Claire Whitmore. I stared until the numbers blurred, the paper trembling slightly in my grip. Jake read over my shoulder, breath warm against my ear. "They're trying," he said. I wasn't ready to forgive, but the check was real, the ink still wet. The check rested on the kitchen counter all night, a small rectangle of paper that carried more weight than the mansion it had helped purchase. I slipped it into the cedar box beside Grandfather's letter and Mother's faded medal, then closed the lid with a soft click that sounded like a door, neither opening nor shutting. Jake kissed my temple before leaving for his shift, his dress blues already laid out for the ceremony later that morning. I watched him drive away, the city still asleep, and felt the strange calm that follows a storm when the air is washed clean, but the ground is littered with debris. The Medal of Valor presentation took place in the Grand Hall of City Hall, marble floors echoing under the boots of 200 firefighters standing at attention. The mayor, flanked by the fire commissioner, read the citation in a voice that carried to the rafters. For extraordinary bravery in the face of imminent peril, for entering a fully involved structure, without regard for personal safety, and for preserving human life through skill and determination. Firefighter Jacob Brennan is awarded the Chicago Medal of Valor. Jake stepped forward when his name was called, shoulders square, eyes fixed on the flag behind the podium. The medal itself was simple gold star on crimson ribbon, but when the mayor pinned it to his chest, the room erupted. Cameras flashed, probies cheered, and I stood in the front row clutching a tissue I never used. Pride swelled so fierce it hurt a physical ache beneath my ribs. Jake saluted, then found me in the crowd and smiled the small private smile that belonged only to us. The circle of rescue, begun in smoke and secrecy, had come full circle in daylight and honor. The mansion sold 3 weeks later, escrow closing faster than any real estate agent thought possible. The final price, $22 million, made headlines for a single day before fading into the business section. A tech billionaire from California bought it sight unseen, planning to turn the carriage house into a podcast studio. The proceeds, after legal fees and taxes, were wired in tranches to accounts my parents no longer controlled. The largest transfer, $8 million, arrived at the foundation with a cover letter on plain white stationery, no crest, no fountain pen. Richard and Claire Whitmore requested anonymity, asked that their names appear only as private donors, and stated their intention to relocate quietly to a condominium downtown. The letter ended with a postscript in Father's blocky handwriting. "We are learning to live smaller." I read it once, folded it into the cedar box, and did not reply. Their retreat from the spotlight was not forgiveness. It was consequence, and I let it stand. With the money came possibility. I resigned from the marketing firm the same week, trading corner offices for a folding table in the back of Jake's firehouse. The Grandfather's Flame Scholarship was born in that cramped space, fueled by the millions already pledged, and the 8 from my parents. We designed it for the children of first responders' tuition books, living stipends. No essays about hardship, just proof of service and a promise to pay it forward. The application portal went live on a Tuesday in March, and by Friday we had 3,000 submissions. I read them at night, feet tucked under Jake on the couch. Tears blurring the screen at stories of single mothers studying nursing, while their fathers worked doubles of teenagers who wanted to be paramedics because a stranger once carried their sibling from a burning car. The fund was no longer charity. It was legacy, the one Grandfather had begged for in ink, now living in code. The first award ceremony took place in the firehouse bay. Engines rolled out to make room for folding chairs and a single podium draped in navy cloth. Jake wore his medal. I wore the navy sheath that had survived 2 national broadcasts. We handed out 20 checks, 10,000 each, while cameras rolled for the local news. The recipients were shy, grateful already, talking about payback in lives saved. When the last envelope was given, I stepped to the microphone to thank the donors, the firefighters, the city that had chosen truth over pedigree. My voice cracked only once on grandfather's name, but I finished strong. The room applauded, then filed out for coffee and the chief's famous chili. Jake squeezed my hand under the table, and for the first time in months, the weight on my shoulders felt like wings. We were cleaning up stacking chairs when a young woman approached the podium. She couldn't have been more than 20, blonde hair in a neat braid, eyes the same shade of green I once saw in dorm room mirrors. The resemblance to Lisa was uncanny. Same tilt of the chin, same nervous smile, but the hope in her gaze was pure, untainted. She clutched a manila folder, knuckles white. "Mrs. Brennan," she asked, voice soft but steady. "I'm Emily Callahan, Lisa's niece. I just submitted my application for paramedic school. My dad's a lineman, been with ComEd 18 years. I know what my aunt did, and I'm not her. I want to be part of this." She held out the folder and I took it, our fingers brushing for an instant. Her eyes never left mine, bright with the kind of determination that bends but does not break. I held Emily's gaze for a moment longer, then opened the folder she offered. Inside was a crisp application, her father's service record clipped neatly to the back, and a short essay that began, "I want to run toward the call, not away from it." I nodded, tucked the folder under my arm, and promised to review it with the committee. She smiled, small but genuine, and walked away with the same straight spine I recognized from years of watching my own reflection harden. The firehouse bay emptied, the chili pots scraped clean, and Jake found me stacking the last chairs. He didn't ask about the resemblance. He simply took the folder, read the name, and slipped it into the pile for approval. Some wounds don't need words. The invitation to meet my parents arrived a week later, handwritten on plain cardstock. No crest. No Lake Forest return address. A downtown cafe, neutral ground, Saturday at 10. I showed Jake the note. He traced the shaky script with one thumb and said, "Your call." I went. The place was crowded with weekend brunchers, the air thick with espresso and maple. They sat in a corner booth smaller than memory allowed, father in a plain sweater, mother in a wool coat that had seen better decades. No pearls, no designer handbag, just 2 cups of black coffee cooling between them. I slid in opposite, ordered nothing, and waited. Father spoke first, voice low enough that the couple at the next table couldn't hear. "We sold everything. The cars, the club membership, the condo in Palm Beach. What's left after the lawyers is enough for a 2-bedroom near the lake. We're learning to live with less." Mother's eyes, the same green as Emily's, flicked to mine and away. "We were wrong," she said. "About Jake, about you, about what matters." The words were rehearsed, but the tremor beneath them was real. I let the silence stretch, then spoke the only truth I had. Trust rebuilds slowly. Maybe it rebuilds. Maybe it doesn't. But it starts with honesty, not checks. Father nodded, shoulders sagging. Mother reached across the table, hesitated, then withdrew her hand. We parted with no hugs, no promises, just the understanding that the bridge was charred but not collapsed. Mother's redemption began the following Monday. I received an email from the coordinator of the Women's Firefighter Boot Camp, a program Jake's station supported. Attached was a photo, mother in navy sweats, hair in a practical ponytail, demonstrating hose drag to a line of recruits half her age. The caption read, "Volunteer Claire Whitmore, former rookie, current mentor." She showed up every week, rain or shine, teaching, not tying search patterns. The calm that comes from knowing fear is just data. The recruits called her Coach Claire. She corrected no one. I saw her once from the observation deck, barking encouragement as a young woman muscled a charged line around a cone. Mother's face was flushed alive in a way the country club never allowed. She didn't wave when our eyes met. She simply nodded, the smallest acknowledgement that the past was ash but the present still burned. Jake and I grew into the space the fight had carved. We no longer flinched at sirens. We leaned into them. He rose to lieutenant, trading midnight shifts for daylight leadership, mentoring probies who looked at his medal the way I once looked at trust funds. I ran the foundation full-time, negotiating corporate matches, reviewing essays at 2 a.m., while he slept beside me, one arm flung across my waist like a seatbelt. We cooked together on his days off, argued over paint colors for the spare room we now called an office-made love, with the windows open to the city's hum. The lawsuits dissolved into settlements and dismissals. The headlines faded. What remained was us, tempered, unbreakable. One night he came home with a tiny scorch mark on his sleeve from a training burn. I kissed the fabric, smelled the smoke, and felt the circle close again. Rescue, risk, return. The boot camp graduation fell on a crisp Saturday in May. Mother stood at the edge of the training yard, clipboard in hand, watching recruits receive certificates. I attended as a donor, not family. When the ceremony ended, a rookie approached her shy and asked for a photo. Mother hesitated, then smiled and posed, arm around the young woman's shoulders. The image hit the department's social media. By evening, 2 generations of firefighters, one in dress blues, one in volunteer sweats. Comments poured in: gratitude, surprise, respect. Mother never tagged me, never asked for credit. She simply showed up week after week, earning back inches of the ground she had lost. Summer settled hot and lazy. Jake and I took a rare weekend at the Indiana dunes, sand between our toes, lake cool against sunburned skin. We talked about children, about balance, about the foundation's next phase. International partnerships, maybe a training center of our own. The future felt wide-earned. On the drive home, windows down, radio low, I realized I no longer checked the rear view for ghosts. The past had been named, faced, filed away. Forgiveness was not a blanket pardon. It was a boundary, clear and firm, and I stood on my side of it, stronger for the burn. Monday morning brought the mail. Amid the usual stack of bills and donor thank yous was a thin envelope, handwriting I hadn't seen in months. Postmark, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I carried it to the kitchen, slid it open with a butter knife. Inside was a single sheet of drugstore stationery, Lisa's looping cursive, smaller than I remembered. Anna, I was wrong. About everything. The money is gone, the friends are gone. The life I thought I wanted is gone. I'm waitressing in a town where no one knows my last name, and every shift I think about the girl who held my hair when I was sick, who toasted my failures like victories. I can't undo what I did, but I can stop pretending it didn't happen. I'm sorry. For the lies, the affidavit, the knife in your back. If you never speak to me again, I understand. If you do, I'll be here. Lisa. I read it twice, folded it small, and slipped it into the cedar box beside the check in the metal. Jake found me there, sunlight striping the floor. He read the letter without comment, then pulled me against his chest. Heartbeat steady under my ear. The apology was late, imperfect, but it was hers. Some fires cool into embers you can carry without burning. The cedar box stayed closed on the shelf. Its contents no longer daily touchstones, but quiet witnesses to a chapter sealed. I left Lisa's letter inside, the ink settling into the paper like a scar that no longer ached. Outside our window, summer ripened into September gold, and the grandfather's flame foundation grew roots deeper than any mansion garden. Applications poured in from every corner of the country, rural outposts in Montana, urban high-rises in Miami, small towns where the only siren belonged to a volunteer department. We hired a staff of 5, rented office space above a bakery that smelled perpetually of cinnamon, and watched the endowment climb past 12 million. Corporate partners matched every dollar. A national coffee chain printed our logo on cups for a month. The first scholarships were awarded in a ceremony, modest by design. A community-centered gym, metal chairs, a single projector beaming names onto a cinder block wall. I read the recipients aloud, voice steady from months of practice. 20 students, 20 futures, nursing, engineering, criminal justice, all tied to a parent or sibling who had answered a call in the dark. Checks were handed over with handshakes, not speeches. One boy, 17, son of a fallen paramedic, clutched his envelope and whispered, This means I can stay close to home. Another, a woman in her 30s restarting after widowhood, hugged me so tightly my ribs creaked. The room smelled of coffee and fresh paint. Outside, engines idled while firefighters stood guard in dress uniforms. When the last award was given, the group asked for a photo. I stood in the center, Jake on one side, the recipients on the other, and felt the circle widen to include strangers who were now family. Jake's promotion came the same week, pinned in the same hall where he had received the Medal of Valor. The chief called him forward, cited years of mentorship, flawless incident command, and the warehouse rescue that still played on recruitment videos. Captain Brennan. The badge read, the weight of it settling on his shoulders like it had always belonged there. He accepted with a nod, no speech, then turned to shake the hands of every probie in the room. That night we celebrated quietly, takeout from the Thai place on the corner, a single candle stuck in pad Thai because neither of us owned a cake pan. He twirled the new badge between his fingers, eyes soft. "Feels like borrowing someone else's life," he said. I kissed the corner of his mouth. "It's yours. You earned it one shift at a time." My own voice found wings on stages I never imagined. Invitations arrived from conferences in Denver, Atlanta. Seattle keynote slots on resilience, on choosing purpose over pedigree. I spoke to rooms of business leaders, to college freshmen, to women's shelters, where the audience leaned forward on folding chairs. The slides were simple. The Polaroid, the medical file. The letter, now icons of a story that belonged to everyone. I told them about the night I walked an aisle alone, about the morning I burned a letter, and swore regret, about the moment I realized legacy was not inherited, but built. Questions came fast: how to forgive, how to stand, how to start over. I answered honestly, slowly, stubbornly, one brick at a time. Afterward, strangers pressed business cards into my hand, asked for selfies, thanked me for giving them permission to choose differently. On the flights home, I slept against Jake's shoulder, the hum of engines a lullaby. The foundation's growth demanded structure. We launched a mentorship program pairing scholarship recipients with active first responders. Jake led the Firefighter side, hosting Saturday drills where college kids learned to drag hose and trust their air. I handled the academic matches, pairing engineers with retired captains who had designed sprinkler systems, nurses with paramedics who had delivered babies in stairwells. The first cohort graduated in December, caps and gowns over turnout gear diplomas clutched like Halligan tools. One graduate, the boy who wanted to stay close to home, sent a photo months later, him in a crisp EMT uniform, standing beside the ambulance that now bore his father's name on the door. The circle kept widening, a ripple that refused to fade. Our days settled into a rhythm strong enough to lean on. Jake's new rank meant fewer overnight calls, more paperwork, but he still rose before dawn to run the track behind the station. Still came home smelling of coffee and diesel. I traveled 2 weeks a month, returned to find the refrigerator stocked and the cedar box dusted. We painted the spare room a soft gray, hung a map marked with pins for every scholarship city. On quiet Sundays, we walked the lakefront, hands linked, wind whipping words away before they fully formed. We talked about a child, about timing, about whether bravery was genetic or taught. Neither of us rushed the answer. The station itself became our second home. Jake's office overlooked the apparatus floor, a window always open to the clatter of gear and the low rumble of engines. I kept a desk in the corner, laptop balanced on a stack of incident reports, foundation work bleeding into firehouse life. Probie pranks, shift change briefings, the smell of chili simmering for 20 details that once felt foreign now wrapped around me like a well-worn coat. One afternoon in early spring, Jake found me there reviewing budgets while the crew polished the ladder truck. He leaned in the doorway, captain's bars catching the light. "Walk with me," he said. I saved the spreadsheet, took his outstretched hand, and let him lead me down the long hallway lined with photos of past chiefs, past heroes, past calls that ended in smoke and silence. We moved slowly, boots echoing on linoleum, fingers intertwined. Sunlight slanted through high windows, dust motes dancing like sparks. At the far end stood the memorial wall, brass plaques gleaming with names of the fallen. Jake stopped, squeezed my hand once, and turned to me with the same steady gaze that had met me at the altar. "Ready for the next call?" he asked. Voice low, smile. Small, but certain. The question hung between us, not about sirens or emergencies, but about the life we had built from ashes, the future we were brave enough to answer together. I squeezed back, heart full, and nodded. The hallway stretched ahead, doors open, light pouring in. The camera zooms in on a shredded wedding invitation fluttering in a crystal vase. My invitation, the one I mailed with trembling hands. Marrying a firefighter. "What a shame," my mother sneered, her voice dripping like ice water down my spine. My father didn't even look up from his Rolex. They boycotted the ceremony. I walked the aisle alone, veil heavy, heart heavier, while my sister smirked in the front pew because mother had already whispered to my fiancé, "Choose her instead. She's the real prize." He didn't. He chose me. Jake, grease under his nails, soot in his soul, slipped a simple band on my finger and promised forever. 6 months later, the nation watched him drag a stranger from a burning warehouse. Medals gleamed on his chest. Headlines screamed, "Hero." Our faces flooded every screen. My phone exploded, 110 missed calls. Voicemails from the same voices that called us trash, now begging, sobbing, "Anna, forgive us." But the real shock, the man Jake saved, was my father. The mother who tried to steal my groom once carried 5-year-old Jake from flames herself. And the blackmailer demanding hush money, my own blood. Stay until the end. You'll see elites kneel, mansions sold, and a daughter rise unbreakable. Every twist is true. Every apology is too late. And the revenge deliciously public. From the ashes of betrayal, we built a foundation that's already awarded its first scholarships, kids of first responders chasing dreams their parents never could. Jake's now Captain Brennan, leading with the same quiet strength that steadied me on our wedding day. I speak nationwide, sharing our story so others find courage to choose love over legacy. Drop your thoughts below. What would you have done if your family turned their back? Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss the next chapter of real-life redemption. Your comments fuel these stories. Let's keep the conversation burning.